Okay, so we're back, and I promise, this is the last lecture. I promise we will finish talking about this chapter, the languages of religion. So the last two items for us to touch on are wisdom literature and poetry. So a lot of people are familiar with wisdom literature, those collected aphorisms that give advice and teach. A lot of these come from the Eastern religions, such as Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, right? These short little sayings like the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So what is that meant to do? It's meant to teach us and give advice that, when you look at a long journey and you say to yourself, there's no way I can do this. Well, you can do it, but the first thing you got to do is you have to get started. You have to take that first step. And the follow-up to this could be the journey of 1,000 miles continues with another step, right? That idea there. So that's wisdom literature. And again, do you remember the common example that most people are familiar with wisdom literature? The book of Proverbs. Exactly. Then we have poetry. Poetry is worldwide. Every culture, every civilization that we know about had poetry in some fashion, generally in the form of song. And remember, poetry uses connotation, not denotation. And do you remember the easy way to remember the difference between connotation and denotation? Connotative language, denotative language? The D stands for dictionary. So poetry and song involves connotative language, which is figurative language or the implied meaning. So on the right-hand side of the screen, this is perhaps the most famous psalm. Psalm is another word for song. That's an example of poetry. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. So that's form of poetry. And I promised that we would end things. And so if you take a look at the self-check, the closing slide, you should be able not only to define, but intelligently talk about and provide some examples for the oral tradition. So real quickly, let's run through the self-check. What is the oral tradition? That refers to the time in human history before the internet, before the printing press, before we had technologies to write down the language, when things were spoken. And that gives us myth. You should be able to provide the correct definition of myth in terms of religious studies and the one that you use outside of religion class. Do that. Talk about symbols, symbolism, and archetype, how they combine to get archetypal symbols. Then the different narrative styles, sacred history, parables, wisdom literature and poetry, and as well as connotation versus denotation. You should be able to talk, provide examples, intelligently discuss everything on this page. So, thank you for your patience and for listening. And we're at the end of this chapter, and I'm at the end of my coffee. So, be well, do good work, and keep in touch.